It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Julio Friedmann. Many of you know Julio from his long and distinguished career in CCS. So he's a CCS aficionado from way back, but his position is now Deputy Assistant Secretary of Clean Coal in the Office of Fossil Energy at the Department of Energy. He's very widely known for his work on carbon capture and storage and his expertise at having testified to U.S. State and Senate. He's been published in a whole range of journals and publications such as Foreign Affairs, Financial Times, New York Times, and so on, in addition to his very extensive body of technical work. So please join me in welcoming Julio Friedmann.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the introduction. You're doing a lovely job here as moderator. I can't help but comment on whether or not that's really the appropriate title for you. Perhaps facilitator or provocateur or some other moderator doesn't seem to provocateur. I thought you might. Anyways, I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here. Before I say something, let me say something. One of the things that I've found interesting, and a number of people have commented on here, is the idea that we keep getting the question about why are we all here? Like what's such the big deal? Like why come to this event? Why come to Saskatchewan? Why witness this history-making event? That strikes me that we haven't done the job we need to in communicating the importance of what we do, the importance of CCS as a technology, or the importance of projects like this. We're really seeing the birth of a new species, and we're not sort of, the world isn't necessarily clocking that that's what's happening here. So it just strikes me that we need to up our game a bit and get on with it. But in that exact context, I am delighted to be here to celebrate and to witness the formal opening of the Boundary Dam project. This excellent and unparalleled work here at the SaskPower in general, and by Mike Monia in particular, has led to a revolutionary outcome, which is the first large-scale CCS retrofit of a coal-fired power plant in North America. I am pleased to join the many dignitaries who are here. A special shout-out to Kelly Tambutu, to Graham Sweeney, to Peter, and the many others here folks who are here to witness 20 years of vision made manifest. In many ways, for me and for many here, this is really the culmination of a dream, and it shouldn't be treated differently than that. For over 10 years, personally, I've worked to try to help enable deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions through the deployment of CCS technology. In this, the Department of Energy has really led the charge in a lot of things. The mission of the DOE has been simple: help enable the development and deployment of clean energy technology in all its forms. This mission has been made more explicit and strengthened actually in the President's Climate Action Plan. Released just over a year ago, and let me just take a moment and draw attention to the importance of this document in terms of how it fosters U.S. policy and the way that we go about our business. It makes clear that we really must pursue an all-of-the-above strategy to build a low-carbon, energy-rich economy. Central to that strategy is the recognition that fossil fuels are part of that future. And if fossil fuels are part of our future, then CCS is the indispensable technology component of that. For nearly 40 years, the Office of Fossil Energy has sought to reduce the environmental impacts associated with fossil energy production and use. For nearly 20 years, it has actively supported a national and international program on carbon capture and storage. This is not lost to most people here. Most people have been partners with us, and we're delighted with that and are familiar with the hard work we've been doing. Our programs support critical path RD&D needed to reduce cost, needed to improve performance, and to manage the risks associated with deployment. Since President Obama took office, the DOE has committed over $6 billion to support and enable this important goal, just this, CCS. And as part of maintaining fossil fuels as a critical option in a carbon-constrained world. Not surprisingly, this has brought us into close partnership with many groups in Canada, and in particular, many groups in Saskatchewan. Since 2000, we've provided important funding and support to everybody's favorite project. If I can get this to roll, Weyburn. which Mike Monia, of course, helped shepherd to success along with many others through partnership with PTRC. I know we're going to hear from Ken Fromm later and looking forward to his comments as well. Weyburn remains for many, and certainly remains this for myself, the template and benchmark for international collaboration in CCS projects. For a modest investment on the back of a commercial development, we learned an immense amount of information and brought many countries together under one tent to deliver an edifice of knowledge which still stands today. It's still the one to beat in my book for how to work together. Those critical findings include the fact that CCS could be deployed at scale, could be deployed safely and effectively in a commercial endeavor. That finding has underlain many important investment decisions and actions, including the development of regulations in many countries, including the US. The EPA cites the work at Weyburn as part of the basis on which the regulations have gone forward. We are pleased and proud to be part of that accomplishment and shared by many countries around the world, including those represented here today. That's not the only thing we've done, of course. The Department of Energy has helped create many novel technologies that have reduced the cost of CO2 capture. Some of that work has led to the creation of new companies. We've created jobs. We've created wealth. Some of that work has led to breakthroughs in manufacturing and in material science. I think we're only just beginning to feel the edge of what that looks like in terms of how far we can move these advancements in material science and in manufacturing. But importantly, it's helped reduce the nth-of-a-kind plant cost for CCS by 50% in 10 years. That is a huge accomplishment. We plan to do it again in the next 10. This will greatly accelerate the deployment of projects like Boundary Dam in the near term and in the midterm. Of course, we don't simply do surface engineering and build surface kit. We have, in my humble opinion, in the Department of Energy, led the world in the study of geological storage. This work has not just involved, simulations using, infinite half-space models in 2 dimensions, or building pixie dust with benchtop studies. Rather, we have pioneered the field testing and validation of storage in many settings, including clastics and carbonates, saline and oil-bearing units, high and low permeability, and now even in unconventional reservoirs such as the Bakken Formation. Much of this work has taken place in our regional partnerships. This program has committed over $500 million in the last 10 years. And a lot of that has involved not just 40 states, but also 4 Canadian provinces, including Saskatchewan. We have now completed 23 pilots. 23 pilots, where we've injected carbon dioxide underground and monitored it and modeled it. We are about to also complete our 9th large injection project. And this kind of information is incredibly important to decision makers all across the board. This program has provided the critical funding also to make major advances in CO2 storage, and has done so in partnership with industry and in academia in the US and Canada together. Moreover, this data has proved vital in demonstrating that CO2 could be safely stored indefinitely. Let me say that again. This data has proved vital in demonstrating that CO2 could be stored safely, indefinitely, in many good and viable geological storage sites. Sharing this data is actually very important. Oops, go back here. We've shared much of this data through efforts like the NatCarb data portal, which many of you are familiar with, and CO2 Storage Atlas, which includes resource maps and estimates for Canada, the United States, and Mexico in our latest volume. Let me also say that we're pioneering a new platform called EDX, the Energy Data Exchange, to further share subsurface data and increasingly engineering data around carbon capture and storage projects. And my program is putting additional funds into that this year and next year in order to achieve that goal. Ultimately, though, it's through commercial projects. Like Boundary Dam, these are the cornerstones of CCS deployment. You just don't get a wedge of abatement without deploying projects like this. And specifically projects that capture and store basically 1 million tons of carbon dioxide a year. It's kind of a kicking around number, but that scale, 1 million tons a year, is still required. For me, projects like this are the engines of innovation in CCS. They provide the platforms for collaboration. They provide the sites for innovation, not just in technology and engineering, but in finance and business models and regulation. It all happens around a project. Feel comfortable saying Secretary Moniz feels the same. I had the good fortune of working with him in 2006 on the Future of Coal report, which spoke to the importance of large-scale projects to get the deployment going. And I've worked with him since to see how projects go and succeed. This is something he speaks to us regularly about and volubly, and we believe is absolutely critical to the continued growth and deployment of this technology. That sensibility is best reflected in our large projects. These projects represent over $4 billion of investment into projects of great size and scale, specifically to provide the key technical, engineering, and economic information needed to support decision-making in the U.S. and elsewhere. I'm actually pleased to see so many representatives from the CCARB, from the Plains Partnership, Peace Corps, from other partnerships here, because in fact that work is so important. These projects include a mix of power projects and industrial projects. They're not all just power. We have industrial CO2 capture projects as well. EOR and saline formation projects, pre, post, and oxy-combustion projects. We have done our best to cover as wide an array of potential projects, specifically to provide the most amount of information to the public. It's the role of government. We're proud to do it and happy to see these projects go forward. I'm just going to take a minute and talk about a couple of these because some of these projects are already active. The first one off the block, one of the Air Products project in Port Arthur, captures CO2 from a steam methane reformer unit in a refinery. It's been operating for 18 months. It's now captured and stored over 1.5 million tons of carbon dioxide. That was going into the atmosphere, now it's going underground. It also bears many strong similarities to the Quest project under construction in Alberta right now, and we hope to be able to share the learnings with Shell and with others as we go forward with this. Second project, which has already received a lot of discussion today, the Kemper County project. This is a brand new 582 megawatt plant, now fully built. It's currently generating power from natural gas. It's in the middle of startup using this groundbreaking gasifier technology, the TRIG technology, which we talked about earlier. It is worth noting that this technology itself was the product of a long-lived DOE industry partnership. It took over 25 years to get this from conception to deployment, and now it's fielded at scale. It uses low-rank coal, abundant in the southern United States and in southern Saskatchewan. It's also cheap. Some of the estimates we've heard are that the costs are on the order of $10 a ton. For fuel diversity and for project financing, that's very, very useful and very important to maintain stable prices and to maintain fuel diversity for their customers. And also, I might add, resilience in the face of natural disasters. When operational, most likely within a few months, nearly 3 million tons of carbon dioxide are going to flow to EOR opportunities in Mississippi and Louisiana and Texas. And you should also know that this plant is not just sort of zero water discharge, it's actually net water positive. It's an important feature in regions where water scarcity is an emergent critical issue. For this crowd, though, I want to draw attention to Boundary Dam's cousin, the Petronova project. Like Boundary Dam, this is also the retrofit of a large coal-fired power plant. Like Boundary Dam, the CO2 will also go to EOR. This project broke ground just last month. We've got Dan Poneman sitting down there in the corner with a shovel in his hand. Let me also say that the Deputy Secretary flew directly from China to Houston so that he could be here for that project. It reflects the degree at which we see this as a priority for the nation. When running, 1.4 million tons of CO2 each year will go underground that were going up into the air. It's also, for my money, importantly, it validates a new business model, the vertically integrated power generator. NRG, the project parents company, started with a 60 megawatt project. When they crunched the numbers, they said, you know what, we have to go big or go home, so we're going to go big. They upgraded to a 240 megawatt project. They quadrupled the project size with no additional government funds. They also are expecting to do a second and a third project, much like the good folks here in Boundary Dam. How? They're pursuing a new business model wherein they own the plant, they own the retrofit project, they own a piece of the pipeline, and they own a piece of the oil production as well. So they're not just selling CO2 for offtake, they're actually getting the profits from the oil sales. In this way, that helps underwrite their effort. Energy is also important for another reason in what they've explored, which is international financing and international collaboration. This project moved forward with 50% financing from Japanese investors and banks. It reflects the new reality that we live in an increasingly interconnected, multinational world. Not surprisingly, the President's Climate Action Plan reflects that, a critical plank is increasing our international cooperation and joining in new efforts to accelerate clean technology development and deployment. In support of such efforts, Secretary Moniz visited Ottawa just a few weeks ago, and he met with Canada's new Energy Minister, Greg Rickford. He encouraged us to seek efforts to bring states and provinces closer together. We have responded by increasing cross-border communication, including an effort by the DOE to support R&D at the Quest site and here at Boundary Dam. And I can't sort of stress this enough. These international partnerships are required. Carbon capture and storage is at its heart an environmental technology aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This is a global problem, and that means it requires global partnerships and global solutions. In short, under our Secretary's leadership, the DOE is now pursuing a more of the above strategy. We seek new projects and new avenues for collaboration with industry, with researchers, and certainly with other countries. In this, we have no stronger partnership today than our existing and growing efforts in Canada, and I look forward to another 10 years of working together. This sort of stuff gets me up in the morning, really. I mean, what gets me up in the morning are these kinds of projects and this kind of deployment. I know that's true for a lot of people here as well. It gives me grounds for optimism. It's also grounds for investment. That optimism and investment will lead to new projects, which will undergird sound policy decisions. I'm just glad to be here at the birth of this project, which has already caused important reverberations worldwide. As more projects come online in North America, in the Middle East, who thought we'd be seeing projects in the Middle East, folks? We've got two, Uthmaniyah and Emirates Steel. In the UK, in China, in Indonesia, in Australia, this decade of CCUS projects will create the foundation for a prosperous, low-carbon economy. Built brick by brick, one project at a time, decision makers can see the edifice of knowledge and the accomplishment for what it is, an indispensable part of a sustainable future. That's the promise of Boundary Dam. That's the promise of Boundary Dam. That is our birth, and that is our inheritance. Thank you again for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and congratulations on your extraordinary work here. Thank you again.
Thank you, Julio. Julio's agreed to take a question. I'll just make one comment before we take the questions, and that's to say how essential the input of DOE through NETL and through the Lawrence Berkeley Labs, that input has been to the Otway project. That's just yet another example of the really fine and essential level of cooperation we've had in this area with the US. So, questions? Okay, I'll ask a question then, and that's how are the emissions standards that are proposed for the US likely to affect the uptake of CCS?
A fabulous question. This is a question I'm asked a lot, and there's different ways in which I answer that question. For this group, let me say a couple of things. One of them is for many of the countries who we've approached and talked to, they viewed the EPA standards, both 111B for new sources and 111D for existing sources, as the first truly substantive actions the United States has taken in terms of deep emissions reductions. Importantly, they've also told us in confidence that that's given them some political cover that they've been able to use to move the ball forward themselves. It's immensely gratifying to hear that, and we're grateful to know that our actions have had that kind of positive consequence. I do believe that it's also caught people by attention. It certainly caught governors' attention. It's caught Public Utilities Commission's attention. It is not yet obvious exactly how these things will enter the market. I personally believe that it will create a positive incentive to deploy more projects like this. Kelly.
Yeah. Julio, great to hear from you. My question is, well, we all know that the US is going through a shale gas boom. Mm-hmm. And, well, that has got real implications in terms of power generation capacity and the source of fuel. Mm-hmm. So how do you see that playing out in the CCS world as you go forward? Mm-hmm.
So a couple of things. First of all, the shale gas revolution, in fact, the whole revolution in unconventional hydrocarbons really is, I view it as an immense opportunity. First of all, it's bought us a few years in terms of accelerating, emissions reduction. It's already helped some in ways that weren't anticipated. It means that, among other things, the United States has almost hit its Kyoto obligations, even though it didn't have any. So that's sort of an important finding. It's also created wealth. And, for those of you who heard me say this before, there's Ohm's law of finance. Money is like voltage, it overcomes resistance. And so all of these discussions are easier when there's actually money to work with. So I view this as actually a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build. It gives me optimism that actually we can get done what we need to get done. Obviously, we're concerned about things like fugitive methane emissions. We have a very large and active program on that in the Department of Energy and working closely with the EPA on that and with industry. Let me also say that it has, what's the right way to say this? The harsh mathematics of atmospheric accumulation dictate that eventually one must capture CO2 from natural gas plants. In its recent rulings, the EPA has decided that that was not a best systems of emissions reduction for gas plants. So at this point, that is not required of any new build gas plants in North America, nor is it expected to change anytime soon. But again, the more that we learn about the urgency around climate change, the potential impacts, the cost of inaction, as this case continues to build and we have more and stronger findings, I firmly believe that we will find ourselves faced with that decision soon, and hopefully we will select for accelerated emissions reduction through CCS deployment.
Another question.
Julio, Tom Dennis from Cassidy and Associates in Washington, D.C. First, a comment. Julio, thanks for all you're doing and for your public service. It's extraordinary. For those of you who don't know Julio and what he has been doing over the years, it's a fresh face and a bright light at the Department of Energy. Question. You've indicated that through the stimulus of the department over the years, all the way from the Clean Coal Power Initiative and monies through the recovery program, that the department's been able to assist the Southern Company, NRG, the HECA project, et cetera. Those dollars have, for all intent and purposes, dried up. Mm-hmm. Could you share with us what your view and what you believe the administration is likely to do to continue to provide the financial wherewithal outside of the loan guarantee program to make sure that these projects move forward?
Yep, thank you very much. This brings to mind a couple of things. One of them is that it reiterates in my mind that our community hasn't done the best job of communicating a couple of important things. When you talk to people in the renewable energy space, and even in the nuclear energy space, they talk repeatedly about the fact that you need to keep developing and deploying new projects in order to drive down the cost curves. And somehow or another, this discussion has not permeated decision makers' minds with the same context with carbon capture and storage. So a lot of people are saying, well, we're done with our first round of projects, great, we don't have to spend money on this anymore. And we have to sort of pull them aside and say, no, that's not exactly accurate. The Wright brothers improved their planes. We can be improving the way that carbon capture and storage is done in terms of cost, performance, all these other things. And there's a public benefit that comes from that, and there's a role for the federal government to make those kinds of investments. Before I move on, you did remind me to mention the Loan Program Office. In addition to the $6 billion that have gone through my program in the past 5 years, we've also got $8 billion of authorities sitting in the Loan Program Office, specifically aimed at fossil power and energy construction with a lower carbon footprint than conventional. And it covers a very wide range of stuff. I encourage you all to go to the site and look for that. They provide decent interest and decent terms on the debt, but importantly, they provide really, really good terms in terms of rate of payback. Instead of 5 or 10 years like you might get at a commercial bank, in many cases it's 20 years or 30 years, and those kinds of terms can really make the difference on a project. I will say that the fact that we need to do a whole lot more is not lost on our secretary. It's not lost on other entities within the administration. We're in the process of trying to make the case internal to the government that we need two sets of things. The first, and in my mind the most critical is we need another set of sort of large pilot projects. Right now we have our 8 demos. We've got a whole bunch of stuff at the bench scale and at the high bay scale. To get these things to market, we still need to move them through a field demonstration at sort of the 20 to 50 megawatt scale. Those are expensive, those are complicated, and at the end of it, you still don't have a commercial product. So that's actually exactly where a substantial role for government support exists. We have gotten clearance to request additional funds for some of those. We'll see how that all pans out, but we consider this to be a technical priority of our program. Of course, assuming that we succeed in that and can demonstrate a second generation of technologies with lower cost and better performance, then we'll actually still need to do the demos. And so eventually we will need to figure out the right way to finance those. While I will say that our tribe at the Department of Energy really focuses on grants as the primary mechanism to do that, I'm pleased to say that there is a lot of discussion within the administration about other ways to finance these things. That discussion is active, so I don't want to comment on it now. But watch this space. I think there are going to be many ways to think about how to get these things up and running. Just as a couple of ideas for other ways to get this done: tax-exempt debt bonding, tax-exempt debt financing, bonus depreciation, production tax credits, investment tax credits, cash in lieu of. There's a whole bunch of potential mechanisms by which one can consider alternative ways of financing projects. And between you, me, and the fence post, the issue with CCS is no longer really an issue of cost, it's really an issue of financing, which is why I'm glad I'm going to be followed by ASHOC at the Asian Development Bank. We've had many people come to us and say the technology barriers aren't there. If we can get the financing to build this plant, we will. And the Petronova project, and to some extent Boundary Dam, have demonstrated that alternative financing approaches can actually succeed. So I think we actually need to sharpen our pencils on many fronts and think about novel ways to get that work done. I know I'm running out of time, but maybe one more question? I think we've got one bit.
Okay, it'll have to be a quick question. Sorry, Kelly, you've had your turn. You can catch him later. Right, final question, yeah.
Hi, Julio. This is John Kane with Chevron. And on one of your slides, if I was interpreting correctly and what you said correctly, it looked like you were showing injecting CO2 into a saline aquifer, pulling out the water to produce fresh water. And I want to ask you about that because one of the paradigms I've always had, and consistent with the messaging I've heard, is that one of the reasons that saline aquifers are great places to put CO2 is that we couldn't use that saline water for anything anyway. But
Right,
it looked like here we were using it to produce fresh water. So
Yeah,
could you?
so yeah, this is something that takes a moment to unpack, so I'm sorry if that was confusing. The point is actually, you're correct. Thank you for rolling back another 2 slides. One more after that. Yet one more. Bingo. So the fact is that the water at depth can't be used. If it's above 10,000 total dissolved solids, ppm, 10,000 TDS, then it's considered unpotable by the EPA and basically can't be used for anything. If you were to try to pump that water to the surface and desalinate it at the surface and dispose of the concentrate at depth, it'd bust the bank. There's no context in which that makes economic sense really ever, unless you're truly desperate. This is the exact opposite of that. Instead, what you're saying is you've already paid for the wells and you've already paid for the compression. That part of the system's already underwritten by the fact that you need to inject the CO2 underground. So all you're doing is drilling a well off-axis someplace and you're harvesting that pressure. What you bring to the surface is a brine. That water is not potable, it's not usable. What you're really bringing to the surface, though, is you're bringing the pressure to the surface, and that has a couple of benefits. One of them I've already talked about. If you're injecting at 15,000 psi above reservoir and the water comes to the surface at 1,000 psi above reservoir, then 1,000 psi is enough to drive a reverse osmosis process. That cuts the cost of desalination about in half, which counts. But one of the other benefits you get is you actually can manage the reservoir actively. For years, our community has talked about CO2 injection with a sort of trust the crust mentality. You know, you inject CO2 and just let nature take over. I don't know of any oil producer that does that. If there's actually money in this, it's hard for me to imagine that people would do that for a CO2 injection either. So we're going to get more sophisticated about the engineering. We're going to induce flows in the subsurface. We're going to manage the pressure explicitly by bringing water up to the surface and treating it. All of these will actually dramatically reduce the risk profile of CCS projects. So we get two really substantial benefits from this. There's a third, too, which is that kind of management also reduces the footprint of the plume substantially. In many cases that we've looked, between 50 and 80% sort of plume footprint reduction. For an area of review process, that ends up being pretty useful. But in fact, the whole point, though, is that you're actually not using a resource. You're creating a resource that didn't exist. And that's the differentiation. Thank you very much.
I think we will have to finish there, but thank you so much for the open way you've answered the questions, Julio, and thank you for a fine presentation. I'd ask you to join with me in expressing our thanks to Julio.